Thanks very much, Jeff. When Jeff first approached me to be a panelist for this discussion this morning, I was a little bit reluctant to do so because I thought, well, I'll probably, in a room full of experts on this subject, have the least amount of expertise on the cycling-car relationship. So in putting together my presentation, I decided to start with a look at statistics, and that reveals a few things about the car-bike relationship in BC. Basically, just to paint a bit of a picture as to what's happening in BC, and I will be referring to statistics that are kept by or collected by ICBC. These are police-attended, police-reported collisions. And just a quick note to anyone who's here from ICBC, we keep referring back to the 2007 collision statistics. We'd sure like to see some more recent data if you ever get a chance. So about 900 reported collisions involving bikes and cars in British Columbia. Of that, as you can see, the overwhelming number of injuries occur amongst the cyclists. There were 10 cyclists killed in collisions with cars in 2007. 19 drivers injured. So as Tim Condon, our CEO at BCAA, mentioned earlier today, that 98% of the car-bike collisions result in either injury or death for the cyclist, and only about 2% for the driver. And also the indication is that the fault in most of these collisions is shared about equally between the driver and the cyclist. A couple of other things that the statistics tell us here in British Columbia about the car-bike relationship. Most of the collisions occurred during daylight hours, and most of them occurred in clear weather conditions. There was one more stat as well that I saw that indicated that 79% of the collisions occurred during dry weather conditions, dry road conditions. Now, most of you here are probably looking at that and saying, well, duh, most people aren't cycling when it's dark and snowing. But that just gives you an indication that it's not necessarily weather or light conditions that are leading to car-bike collisions, but some other things. More than half, 55% of the collisions that occur in British Columbia occur at intersections. And of the 10 cyclists who were killed during that time frame, 2007, 5 of them were not wearing helmets. And in fact, of all the injuries that occurred, 39% were not wearing helmets. Now, this one I thought was kind of an interesting way of looking at this relationship. ICBC in their statistics collect the top contributing factors, what led to that particular collision. And as you can see, there's not much difference between the contributing factors when it was the driver's fault or the contributing factor when it was the cyclist's fault. Inattention, driver inattention, distraction, right at the very top of the list. Failing to yield the right-of-way. But the perhaps interesting one to me is the second one on the right-hand column. 12% of the collisions that were the fault of the cyclist were as a result of the cyclist being on the wrong side of the road. So, leads me to my next point, and I'll just give you a second to read this. I pulled this quote out of a publication entitled Bike Sense, British Columbia Bicycle Operators Manual, published by the Greater Victoria Cycling Coalition, because I thought it really spoke to me as to what the issue is. And I don't, again, think anyone in this audience will disagree that we need to have better education and better awareness of the rules of the road on both sides of this equation, both from the cyclist and from the driver. Trying to find a little bit of information about the extent to which drivers and cyclists actually take any kind of formal driver education or rider education during their lifetimes. And one statistic that I think is fairly encouraging is that as a result of the graduated licensing program here in BC, and I know in most parts of the province there are now graduated license, or most parts of the country, sorry, if not all provinces, there's graduated licensing programs. Some 15 to 20% of new drivers, so these are drivers that are hitting the roads now, are benefiting from some form of driver training. If we take a look at the entire driving population, however, the best estimates are that somewhere south of 10%, probably more in the 5% region, that's how many drivers have actually ever had any kind of formal driver training or education. And if I think back to my own driver learning to become a driver, I was one of the classic late baby boomers who in 1976, when I turned 16 years old, wrote the learner's exam on my birthday, my 16th birthday. And about 2.5 weeks later, I went out and took my road test, and then that was it. I was a fully qualified Class 5 driver in British Columbia with no formal education. And actually, I said to my father at the time, I said, you know, this is strange. I'm out here driving around. I've had really, other than what you've told me, have had no education. So we found a course through the local Okanagan College, a one-day, all-day Saturday course in what was then called defensive driving. So I took this course, and what I realized when I got in there is that the whole room was populated by people who had lost their license and had to take this course in order to get their license back. I was the only one there who was really actually interested in learning some of what was taught there. The other thing that I'd just like to mention at this point is that back in 2004, the BCAA Road Safety Foundation teamed up with the Department of Applied Research and Evaluation at UBC to do an analysis of driving attitudes and behaviors amongst young drivers. So we polled a number of drivers between the ages of 19 and 24. And my colleague David Dunn from the Road Safety Foundation is here and was involved in that study at the time, and would be, I'm sure, happy to talk to you about it over lunch if you so chose. But the other thing, that one of the key findings out of that study was that for young drivers, apart from those who had taken formal driver training, they said that the driving instructor was the person who had the most influence on their driving attitudes and behaviors. But for the rest of them, they said it was their parents, and more specifically, it was their father. And as a father, this is not necessarily good news, because I think there are a lot of times when I'm saying things not necessarily under my breath in my car about the driver in front of me or beside me or behind me, and my son, when he was younger and sitting in the back seat, used to often say to me, "Dad, he can't hear you." But what we found from this study was that the number one influencer of young drivers, not only the source of education that they got on driving, but also influence of their attitudes and behaviors as a driver, came from their parents, more specifically from their father. This is also a great opportunity, I think, for us, and certainly at the Road Safety Foundation, our whole program around teen drivers and teen driver education is now aimed at parents as the influencer and the potential role model for good driving practices. And I think a lot can go onto the cycling side as well. So again, in speaking with some of my more learned cycling colleagues around the city, this is increasing. This is good news. Vancouver Area Cycling Coalition is doing a great job ahead of target in terms of their delivery of cycling programs for this year, and it is growing. Companies are getting interested in bringing individuals into work through various modes of transportation, and view cycling as a healthy means of commuting. So companies are actually looking at organizations like the VACC to provide them with the training for cyclists. But this is really the key, and as was mentioned by the CAA President Tim Shearman earlier today, very proud of our national organization in putting together, worked collaboratively with the Alberta Motor Association, the CAA club in Alberta, to develop an online module, an online training module for cyclists, and really encourage you to go on and take a look at it. I believe, Jeff, it's CAA.ca/cycling. And it's a great new tool. There are other tools available. The Bike Sense one that I quoted and will quote from again in just a moment, I think is an excellent document. The trick is, how do we get these into the hands of people who really could use them? So another quick quote from that publication. And I think that's really the point that I wanted to make, is that this is not the fault of any particular group. That I know there tends to be finger pointing that goes on from cyclists towards motorists and motorists towards cyclists, but we all share in this issue. We need better education all around for drivers and cyclists so that we all know the rules of the road. We need to increase the opportunity for cyclists to get information and for drivers to get information and education as they head out onto the road. So just a quick summary, most bike-car collisions are due to either inattention, a lack of knowledge of the rules of road, or a disregard for the rules of the road. That as cycling grows, the conflict is going to grow unless our mutual understanding, knowledge, and respect for various modes of transportation grows. And as I said, we need to find different ways of providing information and look at all the opportunities through parents, through web-based modules, through whatever social media opportunities there might be available to us to try to get information into the hands and to increase awareness and education of everybody who's on the road. So thank you.
I was trying to think long and hard what I would say during this portion, and I could sit there and lay blame on drivers and cyclists, but I'm not going to do that. If I can get to my laptop. I like the opening speech with the adjustment of attitude and the quote about the inattention and low perception of enforcement. We'll try and cover that. I can't believe there's like 3 Tims in the room. That's one of the things kind of amazed me. I come from West Vancouver. I've lived in, I guess, the North Shore for over 40 years. I was born in Vancouver. West Van has 45,000 residents and 605 kilometers of roadway that we have to police. We're kind of unique because the Trans-Canada Highway, which was done in the 70s, has a bike lane on it, both sides, both ways. And it's very unique for the Trans-Canada Highway to have a bike lane on it because it's a very wide shoulder and it's got actual signs on it saying bicycles allowed. You hit Capilano River, Capilano Road, and it says bike off the road. You're not allowed to ride on the highway anymore. So it's a very unique portion of the Trans-Canada Highway in Canada. I don't know if there's anywhere else in Canada that allows it, but we do. We also have the Spirit Trail, which opened last year. Nice wide cycling walking path, and it's getting used very well. And it's continuing on through the Squamish Nation land and into North Vancouver. They're still working in North Vancouver on completing that portion. So we're going to have a nice east-west connector through West Vancouver, and we hope to connect it one day. I have one of our engineering representatives here, all the way through Horseshoe Bay from what I understand. So that would be really nice if we could go all the way from Horseshoe Bay through out to Surrey one day. That would be a great sort of thing. There we go. We have a lot of bike commuters in West Vancouver, and I like to call them commuters, people who are professionals and they ride to work. I was one of them back in the early 80s, and I think I was the only one in the 80s, would ride across the Lionsgate Bridge to work at Eaton's from West Vancouver. And there wasn't a lot of us out there. Equipment was expensive. You tried to go buy a pair of bike shorts back then. It was like $300 for a good pair of bike shorts. And now you go to Walmart and you can buy a half-decent pair of bike shorts compared to what it was back then. I'm not saying go to Walmart and buy bike shorts, but get a good pair, not those cheap ones. Everything I do is based on statistics nowadays. I brought in a program into West Vancouver. I was asked by our chief at that point in time, Cash Heed, to bring a program in called CompStat. CompStat is a way of looking at crime, looking at collisions, looking at how we do policing, and putting cops where they need to be. Not just kind of go out and drive around and give out 10 tickets. And that's gone. We don't do that. I don't ask my guys to go out and write 10 tickets today. I ask them to go out to places where there's a problem. That's probably my cell phone making a problem here. Go out to that place where there's a problem and deal with that problem. So we look at planning on how to deal with that problem. How are we going to stop people running red lights? How are we going to stop people from being on their cell phones? And we look at unique ways of doing that. With the cell phone, to give you an example, we had in February the cell phone Blitz that we did. I sat in the construction zone in a construction outfit with a hard hat on, with a telephoto zoom lens, and I took pictures of people on their cell phones as they went through the Taylorway Marine Drive intersections. I'd get 5 or 6 pictures of those guys. I'd call back and say, hey, yeah, I got a guy here, 5 pictures on his cell phone, right hand, nice big black cell phone. They'd pull him over and give him a ticket. Ticket for me is the last resort. I would rather see education done, and that's what we're doing today, education. I was approached today by Sarah and was shown this. I've seen this before quite a while ago, but one of the things I'm going to be trying to do, and we're coming up with, we've been looking at different programs on how to deal with the biking issue in West Van, and we have a biking issue in West Van, sort of say, where we have a lot of cyclists who commute, who like to run red lights, who like to go through stop signs, and who like to fail to yield to pedestrians. And we have had some collisions because of that. The cool thing was the Olympic effect last year. I don't know if anybody else is dealing with that, but we had the Olympic effect for about a month where we had no traffic. And now I'm having to kind of backpedal and say, well, our statistics this year have gone up because we had the Olympics going on. There was nobody driving. Everybody was on bikes and walking and taking the bus. So they're asking me why our collision rate has gone through the roof. And that's one of the reasons why. Let's see. I break down cycling, and this is one of the things I have to do, is look at the different types of cycling we have in West Vancouver. We have the commuters, the professional riders almost, the commuters who commute every single day. They're out there in the rain, they're out there in the sun, they're out there in the snow. And believe it or not, I saw a lot of people in the snow this year. I'm going, boy, they're crazy. Little teeny tiny tires like this, riding to work in the morning. These commuters are usually early morning cyclists, or they're there with rush hour. The lighting is, their lights are usually good. They've got so many lights on them flashing away. Like they've got 16 lights front and back, and you're coming towards them, they're blinding you with a white flashing light. And it's fantastic. Good lighting. They got their helmet on. They can zigzag through traffic a bit at times. They'll go around buses and various things, which are kind of dangerous maneuvers. But I also find that they run a lot of red lights. They also run a lot of stop signs, and they don't yield to pedestrians. So I've got to look at how do I deal with those people. Non-commuters, casual people, they're the ones who are they're having their car repaired, or they're just out for a ride, or they're stolen the bike and they're going to come to West Vancouver to do theft. Typically, they don't wear a helmet. They're easy to spot. No helmet. They don't have the lights on at night. They don't have the flashers. And believe it or not, they usually obey the traffic laws. They're the ones who stop. So I'm looking for the bike that stops and, okay, we're going to go check him without the helmet. We get a lot of guys stealing bikes in other places and riding over the landscape bridge and coming to do thefts in West Vancouver. It's true. We have one guy who constantly does that, and that's his form of transportation of getting away from us, is he hops on a stolen bike and rides like the wind. And we catch him about every 3 months, throw him to jail. He goes in for 6 months, comes back out. We catch him, throw him back in. The cycle. So that's what we're doing. Starting probably next week, we're going to be getting a whole bunch of these. We're going to be stopping cyclists who are running red lights, who are not wearing helmets, who are not yielding for pedestrians. We're going to be giving them a book. Here's a book. It's not a ticket, it's a book. Here you go. Go read this, go learn from it. Next time, and it's going to be about a month time we're going to do this, we're going to do it for about a month. After that 1 month of education, guess what we're going to be doing? Then the ticket books come out, I'm sorry to say. If the people don't learn and the people don't start behaving, we have to do that. And that goes for motorists too. We're out there looking for cars all the time, not yielding to bikes, not yielding to pedestrians. They're getting their huge amount of share of attention compared to bicycles. The biggest ticket we give out is no helmet. We pretty well ignore the people running the red lights right now and the stop signs. We stop them, we talk to them, don't do it again. We ignore the people riding to a stride through West Van, although I get a complaint at least a week of the pelotons going through West Van right now. We try to educate them and say, you know, wherever you're in busy areas, stay single file. If you get into the less congested areas like Cypress Bowl Road, where we have, I think it's like a training road for everybody in all of Vancouver, that and Seymour, for hill climbing, go for it. Pelotons all the way. It's uncongested. There's no traffic interaction almost. Fantastic place to go train. But on Marine Drive, when you're riding through, we'll be out there and we'll be telling them single file guys, unless you have an escort vehicle. And that's one of the problems here in BC. The law state you must ride single file. You cannot ride two abreast. So we've had people swear at us when we tell them that, when we pull up beside them on our motorcycles. Hey, single file. Finger comes up and the FU comes out, and then they look around and go, oh, it's a cop. Yeah, not a good thing. But even those ones we give warnings to right now. We're trying to educate, we're trying to be patient, but it's coming to a point where there's a frustration level that we see in certain areas, West Van being one of them. I'm not saying this happens throughout the Lower Mainland, but West Van has some issues that we have to deal with as the West Vancouver Police, and we're going to deal with it fairly and nicely. There was a couple other notes. Bike lanes. I love the bike lanes. A lot of cyclists aren't using the bike lanes. They're riding in the travel portion because the bike lanes are too dirty. West Van keeps them nice and clean. Thank you very much. The engineering department does a great job. The Ministry of Transportation Highways up on the highway wasn't doing a very good job. I kept telling them. 2 of my most serious collisions last year were caused by debris on roadway. One of the cyclists was in the hospital for 6 months because he hit a piece of a hubcap and went end over end, and serious injuries. Doing okay right now. So they need to do, the municipalities putting these bike lanes are great, but they got to keep them clean. And the cyclists got to get the right bikes for commuting. If you buy these race bikes with the little teeny tiny thin tires that basically takes, I don't know, a sliver, a thorn or something to pop your tire and that's it, you're going to be getting a lot of flat tires. When I commuted, I had 2 bikes. I had my race bike that I used to race with, and I had my commuting bike, which had the commuting tires on it. So I didn't mix the 2 up when I was out there riding. So otherwise, I'd probably have flat tires all the time, like they do. I see them all the time from a ride. You want to ride to the bike shop? That's about all I have to say. Road rage, growing. Avoid it. Don't yell at people. Thank you very much.
As you can see here, picture, my name is Hans Moor. I work for Citizens for Safe Cycling in my spare time. You can see a cyclist here. I'm not sure if that's the right cyclist that we should use for an image for cycling in traffic. I'm gonna add a Dutch bicycle there. It's a Gazelle, and you can see he's sitting upright, much safer. We're gonna get back to that a little later. Sorry. Citizens for Safe Cycling, founded in 1984. I think we are around for 10,000 days this summer. So the geeky side in me calculates things on a snowy afternoon. We work with the city and the NCC, the National Capital Commission. Does everybody know what the National Capital Commission is? It's an organization in Ottawa that, which mission is the beautification of the capital, and we use all your money for our bike lanes. Thank you very much. We promote cycling as a safe, fun, great way to go around. Being from the Netherlands, I lived 35 years in Holland. I feel sometimes I'm thrown back into time about 30, 40 years when I'm in Canada. And as you said in the introduction, I was complaining about traffic and cycling and potholes and everything. And then I realized I probably should do something more positive. So I got involved in cycling, which is really great, and it's really progressing in Ottawa. Not so much thanks to me, but it's nice to be in that momentum. Born and raised in the Netherlands, as I said, I married a Canadian woman. I came to Canada 13 years ago, and I realized that Europe is not North America. I think personally we're at the point that we don't really need Europe anymore so much, because there's a lot of knowledge in Canada now in North America to build our own knowledge databases about cycling in North America. Still good to see what other people are doing in Europe, but I know, for example, in November last year, the Dutch government announced $100 million for 7 bike routes in the west of the Netherlands, and just this week another Minister of Traffic announced $100 million or $98 million for bicycle storage. So these are the things that are happening in Holland, and I know that doesn't work in Canada this way. So I realize more and more my presentation should become more Canadian and less Dutch. Picture I took last week in Ottawa. A lot of things are changing in Ottawa, lots of momentum going on. 3, 4, 5 years ago, I was still the only one cycling from baseline downtown, 8 kilometers. Now I feel like whenever I look up and the sun is out, there's cyclists all around me. And it's really, in some places, getting to Vancouver levels already. Improving the bike-car relationship. I think it's actually pretty good. I think that in general, I've never really had an accident in the 13 years I'm cycling in Canada. Once I was hit by a car. The car cut me off, as we saw in one of the images. In despair, I threw up my hands. How can you do this? And then the car stops and I'm right on the road there. Distinction of 2 conflicting groups, I think it's very exaggerated. If I talk to cyclists in general in Ottawa, we feel it kind of works fine, and most people are drivers and cyclists as well, something that has been mentioned before as well. I think it's exaggerated, especially by the newspapers. There's the perennial springtime letter to the editor from an angry driver who says that all cyclists are idiots and they should be on parks. Then 50 cyclists react and they're all angry with drivers. Drivers should be banned, etc., etc. Happens every springtime and again in autumn when everybody goes back to school and to work again. I always ask my members not to react because it's a useless discussion. I don't think it shouldn't even exist. Safety in the law, I think they're 2 different concepts. Give some thought for you. Law doesn't really guarantee safety, as you mentioned already. I'll give you a nice little thing that I dreamt up this weekend. There's different combinations you can make. There's legal and safe things like cycling in a quiet neighborhood on the right of the road. Perfectly safe, perfectly legal. Also things that are not legal. Cycling against the traffic, as we saw, causes accidents in a suburban cul-de-sac on Sunday morning at 6:30 a.m. Not legal, but not really unsafe either. However, drinking coffee behind the wheel, I think is actually safe, is it?
It's not safe, but it's legal.
It's legal, eh?
Currently in BC,
yeah.
Some places are making it illegal.
Yeah. So I think it's not safe, but it is legal. Not legal and not safe, obviously, drinking and driving. Ottawa Provincial Police, the Ontario Provincial Police did a Blitz this last weekend. 10,000 tickets, 200 drunk drivers. What I did as a kid, where we cycled to school with the 4 of us to high school, 5, 6, 7 kilometers every day. We tried to cycle back from school to home without touching the handlebars. That was the game that we did. And sometimes we succeeded. There were some rules that you could use the bars when a car was passing you. Well, we actually managed to cycle from home with the hands in the pockets, and the brakes are actually the backpedaling brakes, so you could kind of control your speed a little bit. So that's what we used to do. Obviously not safe and not legal either. However, not illegal road behavior is by definition unsafe, and you indicated that a little bit, that you're not really going after every little traffic accident and that there are other traffic violations. Yeah. So that's something that's probably important to remember. Let's look to some safe and some less safe conditions for cyclists. So I'm seeing this through the eyes of a cyclist. One thing I want to ask you, who actually cycles to work every day? Oh, pretty good. I thought maybe 2% or so, but it's luckily a little bit more. As you can see, this is part of my bike route. This family was moving, I think, loading and unloading the car, totally oblivious that they were sitting on a bike lane. But again, it's a very quiet road. I go around it. I'm not sticking up middle fingers. I just accept that. That's okay. Cycling, this is the same place, the different directions though. Ottawa in the spring morning. This could have been last week, but it was actually a year ago. You see somebody cycling there, wide shoulder, perfectly safe. There are people who are saying, well, wait a minute, it's not safe at all, because if a car is, or if a driver is doing something, is distracted, can still hit the bicycle from behind, but in general, it's a pretty safe place. Prince of Wales, Ottawa. Prince of Wales in the winter time looks like this. I took this picture while cycling with one hand on the bar. About the bike lane is usually about 1.5 meters wide, I suspect. As you can see, this is a scary moment even for me, and I'm not really afraid in traffic. I'm probably in this 1% from Roger Geller. I'm not afraid for cycling at all anywhere. But this is something that I don't really feel comfortable anymore. So all of a sudden, a safe place becomes an unsafe place. The bikes right of way. One thing is very important to know in Holland. Bikes have often the right of way. As you can see here, the cars actually have to stop. And that really slows the traffic down because they know that obviously. And you can see the triangles here. We call them shark teeth in the Netherlands. Cyclists have the right of way here, much safer than having to wait for traffic speeding by. The other picture there is I think it's Woodruff. It's an on-ramp to the Queensway. The Queensway cuts right through Ottawa. And there's lots of places where you can cross, but you don't always want to go way out of your way if you go to work every day. So people do take this route. Cars are speeding up 60, 70 k an hour to go on the on-ramp, to go on the Queensway. As a cyclist, the green arrow there, obviously you're a lot less comfortable cycling there. And this is not a very safe situation. The Rideau Canal, this is one of the NCC shared pathways. Basically downtown Ottawa, between the Glebe and downtown. Perfectly safe to cycle, very nice to cycle. At the end of the canal there is Dow's Lake. And the next picture is very close to there. You can see here that this is an official bike lane here. It actually has I believe it has a bike sign somewhere, but it's a bike lane. Completely ignored by cars who are leaving some event or so. There's 7, 8 cars using the bike lane. And once I got off my bike and told the driver that he was actually in a dedicated bike lane, and I got the finger and the 3 F words in a row. Oh, it's actually broadcasted on the web. I better be careful. Picture from Vienna. As you can see here, very clearly shows where the bikes are and that the bikes are going to merge, that there's the right turning lane there. And the other picture is actually a picture in Ottawa again. This is one of the places where I'm really getting nervous because there's traffic coming from Riverside merging into Walkley here, and that they're speeding up to 30, 40 k an hour already. Just the intersection is behind me. But also from the other side, traffic is racing in here. So here you're cycling your bike lane, all of a sudden it stops. And there's traffic coming from here and from here. You're kind of sandwiched between two traffic streams here, which is a really scary situation. Then again, some distraction. We've mentioned that before, so I'm not going to go too much into it. I've seen it all. I've seen it from my bicycle. People doing their makeup on baseline, 60, 65 k an hour. People eating, people talking to their fellow passengers, people checking cell phones. Just 2 days ago when I cycled home, 2 people on 8 kilometers just happily chatting on their phone. But obviously it's a bit hard to take pictures while you're cycling from people on cell phones, so therefore I took images from Google. So this is something I found last week. Allstate Canada poll suggesting that 38% of Alberta drivers report they or someone they know have been in an accident involving a distracted driver. And we noticed in the statistics, I think it's 22% or so of the accidents is from, I think you mentioned that, yeah. And I think you're going to talk about it as well.
Am I?
Yeah? You have to. Yeah. Another thing I want to point out, and again I was trying to think, okay, what am I going to say? So I kind of pulled a few things together. The picture in the Netherlands in front of my parents' house. You'll notice that people cycle next to each other. This is totally legal in Holland and always encouraged. When the kids cycle to school, first time I saw a school bus was actually when I came to North America. When kids cycle to school, they're encouraged to cycle next to each other because then you have the width of a car and cars wait behind you. And remember that 18 million bicycles in Holland and 16 million people. So basically everybody owns a bike. Everybody has kids or family members who cycle to school. So they accept that. They wait behind cyclists. And then they pass when there's space. However, if you cycle alone, there's no real incentive for cars to slow down. So they'll just keep on driving 50, 60 k an hour past you. And then you get buses on Wellington who barrel past you, and this is about the space you have left as a cyclist. Another scary situation. 5 American ladies from Raleigh, North Carolina. I asked if I could take a picture. They rented bicycles in Ottawa. You'll notice that the bikes are upright bikes, which I think is much safer because you have to be visible in traffic. And if you're sitting, I'll do it for the people on the web, watching on the web. If you're sitting this way, then you don't have the same way you can turn your head around. You're lower, your weight is in your wrists rather than in your bum. Upright bicycles are much safer for cycling in traffic in urban situations. Everybody who has been to the Netherlands has seen that 99% of the people cycle upright. Mountain bikes are used in cities. I think it's not smart. Mountain bikes are supposed to be used in the mountains. Helmets. We've mentioned that as well, of course. One thing I want to point out is helmets don't make cycling safer. They actually increase the chance of surviving a serious accident. Yes, I do wear a helmet. In Holland, I never wore a helmet. And even if they make it law, I'm sure everybody will ignore it, basically. But as I said, it doesn't make cycling safe. If I go from A to B in the the same situation, then a helmet is not going to make me feel safer all of a sudden. It just increases the chance that I survive my accident. I want to touch a little bit in Ottawa, and then I'm basically done. We have 2-3 counters under the pathway in Ottawa. Behind the War Museum is a counter. We counted last June 82,000 people. That's about 2,700 a day, which is basically like, I think I saw one of your slides, basically approaching Vancouver levels already. Along the canal we have a counter, 40,000 bike rides a day, and we expect it's going to increase because, as I said, the momentum is really there in Ottawa. So there are a lot of good things happening in Ottawa in terms of cycling. These are 2 counters, and they counted 660,000 trips in 2010. We're adding more counters, by the way. So, as I mentioned already, cycling is increasing worldwide for economic and health reasons. I give other presentations basically talking about the economics of cycling. I've done it in Nova Scotia, Calgary, Regina. I'll tell a lot about what the cost of a car is, for example, based on CAA numbers, by the way. Responsibility, we've mentioned that already, all road users to make sure that everyone arrives home safely. And cycling in Canada, I think, is safe, but it's not always encouraging. The infrastructure definitely has to improve. For me, a no-brainer being from the Netherlands with bike share, model shares of 30%. And obviously, it's very important that drivers are aware of cyclists. So 3 tips for those who are driving and not cycling yet. Don't underestimate the cycling speed. It takes about 1 second to cover the length of your car, and I'm not talking about somebody who cycles 35k. The average cycle speed is 18-19 kilometers an hour. That's about 5 meters per second. So a lot of the reasons why people are cut off on the bicycles is because cars don't, or drivers I should say, underestimate the speed of cyclists. They think they can still make it, but all of a sudden the bike is there. Look over your shoulder before you turn right. That's one very important thing that doesn't always happen, I notice when I'm on my bicycle. And also look over your shoulder before you open the door. I want to add there that in Holland, if you take a driver's exam and you forget to look over your shoulder when you open the door at the end of your exam, you failed the test. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for giving the opportunity to speak today, by the way. When you wrote the blurbs for this thing, you described me as an avid cyclist. Unfortunately, I'm not as avid as I used to be. About 3 years ago, I was knocked off my bike by a careless driver and I was hospitalized. I spent some time in a wheelchair. It was her fault completely, but I'm the one that went to the hospital. As it happened, I was on my motorcycle, but what I have to say I think applies to bicycles as well as motorcycles. I love cars and I love motorcycles, but I've been riding bicycles since I was like 5 years old, so I like them just as much. And I remain enthusiastic about cars, bikes, and motorcycles, but I've learned a few things along the way. According to a recent study by the Traffic Injury Research Foundation of Canada, motorists simply do not see motorcycles and bicycles. Because of their smaller size and different rates of speeds, bikes do not register in the brains of many drivers in the same way as an automobile. A neglectful driver may see a bike, but somehow the message is lost along the way before his or her brain can do the right thing. This is especially true of older drivers, I'm sorry to say. The phrase, "I just didn't see him," is one that's well known to medical and law enforcement personnel. And although it hurts to say it, it's true. Motorists do not see bikes. I'm here to tell you that's the case. So it behooves riders to keep this uppermost in their minds when they ride. This applies to both motorcycles and bicycles, incidentally. One may be slower than the other, but in the eyes of motorists, they do not carry the same weight as a car. Ignore this at your peril. They've also discovered that the kind of clothing you wear on a bike or motorcycle is really important. Light-colored helmets and brightly colored clothing is what you need to be wearing. Black, I don't know how many cyclists wear black helmets, but a black helmet has zero, doesn't register at all apparently. So color is a big thing. Anyway, so this leads me to my first suggestion for automobile drivers. How about giving drivers a break? How about checking twice before you pull out into traffic, turn left, or open your car door? How about waiting for that extra half a second before you make your move? And if you see a bike, human-powered or otherwise, stop and think about the situation. Everybody here probably drives a car. I don't know, there's a lot of bike riders here, but a lot of people also drive cars. And the consequences of neglect for riders is severe. So in a nutshell, readjust your thinking is what I'm trying to say. Bikes are here to stay, and there are going to be more of them as time goes by. And if I had my way, every motorist in the world would have to spend at least a week on a bike before they could get their driver's license. Maybe then they'd see how dangerous it is out there. You can't really appreciate it until you get out there on two wheels and you realize how vulnerable you are. Maybe that would change the way people think about things. And this leads me to my second observation, and this time this is for riders. In a nutshell, lose the attitude. Stop demonizing automobiles and acting like you have the high moral ground. Just because you ride a bike, that doesn't mean you're special, cooler than motorists, holier than thou, or above the rules that apply to the rest of us. Not everybody can or wants to ride a bicycle. Now, we've all had our problems with road rage and seemingly psychotic drivers. I know I have, and I've got the scars to prove it. But I've encountered the same kind of behavior from cyclists as well. For reasons I'm not clear on, Vancouver in particular seems to have more than its share of in-your-face militant cyclists who will only be happy when every single automobile in the world is instantly vaporized. As far as they're concerned, automobiles are tools of the devil, and the sooner we get rid of them, the better. So tell that to the single mom who has to drop off and pick up her kids at daycare every day, or the senior who relies on a car just to get the necessities of life, or the tradesman that has to commute with a full load of tools and equipment. In one form or another, cars are also here to stay, and staging critical mass events, giving motorists the finger, and blocking off main routes of traffic is not going to help anybody. I ride a bicycle as often as I can, but that doesn't mean I feel compelled to paint myself silver, wear funny clothes, and block traffic. And that's right, critical masters, I'm talking to you. You've made your point, the authorities are listening, and things are changing. Vancouver has installed 2 bicycle lanes, with probably more to come, and things are, or 3, I think 3 lanes now, and things are much better for riders than they used to be. So for the vast majority of riders, bikes are still discretionary transport, and likely will remain so just remember that. Which leads me to my final observation, and this is for the people who make decisions about cars and bikes. First up, try to remember that a car is not a luxury or an unnecessary evil. The vast majority of people can't get by without their cars, and continually hassling motorists with punitive traffic fines, higher taxes, heightened law enforcement, and convoluted city planning, it just makes things worse. I was born and raised in Vancouver, but conditions for motorists in the downtown area are becoming intolerable, and I don't think it's fair. Secondly, look at the numbers. How many people ride bikes and how many drive cars? The Broad Street Bridge is a case in point. By all means, build as many bike paths and rights of way as you can, but don't do it at the expense of motorists. The tail is wagging the dog in Vancouver these days, and the vast majority of commuters have to suffer because of the whining of a small group of zealots. Now, the other day, I drove across the Broad Street Bridge at the height of rush hour on a nice spring day, and I counted less than a dozen riders. The bike path on this bridge only happened because militant cyclists intimidated City Council, in my opinion. This is a major artery to the downtown area, and there's plenty of room for cyclists on either sidewalk of the bridge. How about some sort of a compromise here? How about giving the bridge back to the motorists in the winter and utilizing the sidewalks properly? West side for bikes, east side for pedestrians. Widen them, put some barriers along so people don't fall off them. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that bike riders and motorists don't have to be at each other's throats. There's plenty of room for everybody, and just think things through and have a little respect for the other guy. Hopefully I can be as avid as I used to be. Thanks.
The good thing, I guess, about being the last is you get to make a few comments on what everybody said. I actually won't do that, but I was interested in a few of Ted's comments. Ted, tell us how you feel, really. Don't hold back.
Day's not over yet.
Day's not over yet. No, it's good, and I want to applaud the CAA for having this dialogue and this conversation. I want to thank them personally for inviting me to come here, and I'm always pleased to do so. I see lots of old friends in the room. friends on the panel, of course, friends in the audience, and I have to say that amongst the cycling fraternity, you've really reached down and grabbed really the best in Canada, so congratulations. And I did want to thank you. And also, as we all know, and I organize events like this, it doesn't take just a few people, but many. And notably, I wanted to thank Jeff and Elaine Crawford and Ian Jack. Ian, a former friend from my days on Parliament Hill, and nice to see all of you, and thank you very much. I think the CAA has the opportunity here to be a real game changer in a national conversation about exactly what we're addressing today: road users, vulnerable road users, motorists, buses, trains, planes, the whole 9 yards, really, in terms of how we navigate the complex equation and try to mitigate some of the pernicious problems that are facing our society. I did want to make a reflection on Hans's comments, and those of us who have the privilege of doing this work and doing a bit of international travel in places like Holland and certainly in Denmark, where cycling is a way of life, they take a more pragmatic approach. And one of the things that I would that I've noticed actually is that they've moved beyond this conversation of sharing the road. Really, it doesn't mean that that doesn't happen, but my friends in Holland tell me all the time, Eleanor, we rarely talk about safety, which is interesting, and I'm hoping that we get to that place. Actually, it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen, and unfortunate accidents and collisions don't happen, as the sergeant will tell us. But it means that, you know, that the way of coexisting has moved to such a practical conversation that of course, as I noted, is not without its challenges. But you know, the stakeholders in this conversation have embraced cycling not as a something to be tolerated or an afterthought, but actually a practical solution. And so I think that, as an observation, serves to mitigate some of the rather emotional debates that tend to happen when feelings run really high. And my final comment on all of that is that the emotion comes largely, and I'm a cyclist, I'm also a motorist, I'm a recreational cyclist, but I'm also a commuter cyclist. And when a fear happens, because we're so vulnerable, we tend to get irrational, and I think that's human. And I think that drivers get frustrated, motorists get frustrated, and that's human too. What I think we're all interested in doing is limiting the opportunity for those encounters to happen and maybe improving the conversation. So with that opening set of remarks, I guess, and observations on my colleagues, I'm going to move forward. This is my husband, Greg Starbert. He was a sergeant on the Ontario Provincial Police and sadly lost his life in a cycling collision in June of 2006. I talk about Greg. I love to talk about him. Not a day goes by, obviously, when I don't think about him. This collision, the 5-year anniversary of the collision is coming up. It's June the 6th. And I probably will never forget Greg, and I hope I don't. And he certainly has shaped my life in many ways, but certainly over the past 5 years, as we have taken the opportunity to make change in light of a preventable tragedy, that's been an important dialogue that we've been having since that time. Greg's collision was one of those sadly very preventable ones. A careless driver who was convicted of careless driving under the Highway Traffic Act, and really had sadly a very regrettable driving history. At the sentencing hearing, we learned that he had 5 convictions for driving with no insurance, 4 convictions for driving under suspension, $15,000 in unpaid fines, and 2 months after he killed my husband, he hit someone else. This is a profile of a driver who is, and fortunately there are only, you know, there are not too many like him, but they're out there. And Sergeant will tell you that it was my husband's great frustration that he couldn't get those drivers off the road and keep them off the road, quite frankly, because they are a cause of a great number of our driving infractions, and they simply drive without due care and attention and responsibility. And that, again, is something that's in all of our interest to try and prevent. I am glad to see law enforcement here. I think they're a vital partner in this conversation. And what we've been trying to do in Ontario, and I know many of you as well in your own jurisdictions, is create legislation and talk with legislators about making our roads safer by giving law enforcement the tools that they need to keep our roads safer. And that's an important objective for us. So a preventable tragedy, but certainly something that we hope has led to some viable action. In that regard, we decided at the outset, and this remains a broad area of 3 broad areas of focus for us: legislative reform, in my husband's memory, we had a law passed that targets the kind of pernicious sort of repeat offender that took his life. And so now if you drive in Ontario while your license is suspended, there's immediate penalties that include vehicle impoundment for up to 7 days, a significant additional fine, further license suspension, and all of which is immediate and without even going to court. So it's proven in other jurisdictions in Canada, where there are 7 provinces now that have this kind of legislation, that this kind of law works and is effective and is a behavior changer. The other 2 things that we focus on are building a bicycle-friendly Ontario, which broadly means building capacity in the municipal sector, creating forums to share best practices and the like, and finally building the movement, which is, I'm happy to say, because this room sort of reflects that, not just about cyclists, but it's about legislators and health care folks and folks in public health. Cycling advocacy groups, of course, are part of that, but law enforcement is part of that too. And of course, relationships with folks like the CAA are a growing part of our work too. So we decided to create our organization after an extensive 1.5-year research project, outreach, international best practice, environmental scan, really talking to colleagues across Canada internationally about what works. And we launched our organization in 2008 with a mission to create and unite cycling organizations, from across the province and give them those tools and again to do the work that we're trying to do and are succeeding, I hope, in doing. I wanted to start with a little bit of polling data. Jeff talked about it at the front. I'm a big fan of polling data too, and of course what gets measured gets managed, as we all know. This is sort of a fun poll. Gallup does a happiness survey, a global happiness survey every year, and it came out in April. And Denmark, although Hans, I have to say that the Netherlands was in the top 10. You'll be pleased to know. But the Danes were the happiest. 72% of them said, "Yeah, we're a happy bunch," and I like to think that's because they have a 39% mode share of cycling, because by and large, despite all the grumping and the challenges from time to time, cyclists are happy people. We enjoy doing what we do. Cycling is a joyous activity for us. From time to time, yes, it can be difficult, but by and large, it's something we very much enjoy. And for those of you that have been to Denmark, it is a joyful place to cycle, actually. Nirvana. Close to nirvana. The other survey that I thought had some nuggets of interest in it appeared in yesterday's Globe and Mail. And the OECD released their Better Life Index. And this is a global index, of course, and it has indices that rate economic well-being, and they connect it to quality of life, which I think is really important because the work that we're doing and many of you are doing is about creating vibrant, healthy communities, and those that are bicycle-friendly and walk-friendly generally attribute that connection to enhance quality of life for their citizens, and it's an economic draw and investment rather than the contrary. Happily, 75% of us in Canada think that life is pretty good. We're number 2 on the index, by the way. Australia was the big winner. And I like this. Most reported helping a stranger anywhere else in the OECD. So we sort of led that list. And I like to think, without being sanctimonious, that as Canadians, we're valued for that. And it really has shaped our consciousness and makes us good peacemakers and good peacekeepers globally. And it's part of what has shaped our reputation internationally. And I'm hoping that because we exhibit these values, that as citizens of the world, we are able to, within our own confines, really address some of the topics that we're talking today, how to get along better, how to share the road. And that could be a naive hope, but I'm going with it because I think it's important to focus these things from a positive perspective. One of the challenges that was highlighted in the report, incidentally, also has, I think, a connection to cycling and active transportation. 25% of us are obese as adults, and that obviously contributes to high disease rates, rising healthcare costs that we should all be concerned about. And yet, this rising awareness, and we all know the obesity statistics, is not triggering action. And in Ontario, where we have an election in October, we're going to spend some time at our summit at the end of June talking about connecting the dots. The Premier of Ontario has recently announced that healthcare is going to be a number one issue in the election for him, which is great because rising healthcare costs can be mitigated by doing some of the things that we like to talk about and some of the things that we're talking about today. So unfortunately, though, we haven't seen that action yet, and those dots aren't being connected. The good news is, as we know, cycling can mitigate or contribute to many of the challenges facing our society. The tough news is, though, that there's no silver bullet, and I'm going to get to that in a moment. In order to best explore how to proceed in Ontario and create the kind of life-changing policies that we need, we undertook some significant research. We hired a research firm in 2009. They're actually a Vancouver-based firm, Stratcom, and they helped us out with doing an extensive survey of stakeholders to really look at shaping an Ontario bike policy. I'm happy to say that it has resulted in the first bike policy in 16 years. We published our paper. Jeff noted it off the top in 2010. It's on our website, sharetheroad.ca. And critically, again, we now have a bike policy in Ontario. I'm hoping that it will see the light of day before the election so that we can have the kind of conversation we need to have. But there you are. Not surprisingly, we interviewed 1,400 stakeholders, and these included municipal leaders, mayors, councillors, reeves from across the province. We talked to law enforcement, the planning profession, engineers, cycling enthusiasts, the whole 9 yards. And about 500 people got back to us, which we were enormously pleased because it was a very extensive survey. And what did they say? Well, not surprisingly, infrastructure funding by government is going to be the number one game changer. And municipalities increasingly, not just in Ontario, but across the country. Our friends in Quebec got it right, and they've made tremendous investments in cycling infrastructure at the municipal level, but other governments, notably ours in Ontario, need to make that kind of investment. So infrastructure funding, not a surprise. Number two, education and awareness programs for motorists and cyclists. 74% of respondents said, yep, need to address that. The Ontario government should be playing a direct role in providing assistance and addressing that as the number two priority. The third is really something that I call changing the conversation. And it's about public promotion and awareness campaigns implemented in conjunction with all the rest. Again, back to the original comment, there's no silver bullet. If there was, we wouldn't be here. We'd all be happy cycling and like we lived in Holland or Denmark, and the world would be a better place, but it's not. And these are some of the things we need to do. So changing that conversation, number three on the list. And finally, policy and legislation, giving law enforcement the tools that we need, getting laws in place that are going to make our roads safer for everybody, not just cyclists and motorists, but everyone, and creating the kind of policies that we've been working on in Ontario, notably a provincial bike policy, which of course they have in other provinces in Canada. I do want to talk very briefly now about changing the conversation because I think that's what our key topic is about today. The prevailing car culture in which the car is a dominant mode of transport is a significant barrier to encouraging cycling and walking. I think that goes without saying, but it's important to underscore. In order to promote alternative modes of travel, there's a need to break down entrenched attitudes while improving the physical environment. And I think that's what this slide shows. To change behavior, we need to understand and allay some of the perceptions of all road users. In short, cycling promotion is not just about getting people to abandon their cars in favor of bikes, but encouraging people to be more selective, to exercise their freedom of choice, and to use bikes for trips where the bicycle is particularly suitable. Many of you will know this, but in Canada, upwards of 40% of our trips are 5 kilometers and less, which is ultimately doable by bicycle. It's an easy route. And I was interested in Councillor Meg's presentation where he talked about the majority of bicycle trips in Vancouver being around the 5 kilometer mark. So I think that's proof positive. In the context of what gets measured gets managed, we wanted to build the case for investments in cycling, and so we decided to take a snapshot. Stratcom went out and interviewed 1,100 Ontarians. I'm really interested here, or we are really interested here, in asking people why they don't cycle. What's preventing them from getting on the bike? And I think Jeff addressed some of this off the top, but our data demonstrates that 60% of Ontarians would get on a bike more often if they felt safer. And they're worried about their safety, and that's simply something that we need to address. in essence, how do we get the 24% of people who ride occasionally to become frequent riders, and how do we crack that 70% who don't? In order to continue our approach on the evidence-based continuum, we did another omnibus poll. We do one a year. And before our bike summit last year, we went out to the field again. This was a particular snapshot of a space in time. There had been in Ontario, and I think it's probably prevalent across the country, some highly inflammatory comments that were made in the Toronto area by some city councillors that were really sort of, I hate to use that word because it sounds a bit dramatic, but I think we can't understate the impact of a city councillor saying things like there's a war on cars in Toronto and so on, because it really does give license in some respects to, I think, behavior which is inappropriate, but it also demonstrates a lack of leadership and visionary leadership by simply pointing fingers, and we need and want better comments from our city councillors in that regard, one would hope. And it served to polarize the debate, which is distinctly unhelpful, because one of the unfortunate outcomes is that it makes our champions who think that this is actually a good idea, I would suggest Councillor Meggs is one of those, it makes life much more difficult for them. And my job, at least in part, is trying to make it easy for folks like that to say yes, and for all of our politicians to say yes. And so when we have a conversation that's full of invective and inflammatory comments and unhelpful conversations, it just makes all of our lives a lot easier. So in order to address what we think is a false paradigm of motorists versus cyclists, and the media asks me all the time, what do I think about the declining relationship? And I point out what has been mentioned already. And the fact is that we're all swimming around in the same pond. Most cyclists are motorists and vice versa. And so really, we need to address that for the false paradigm that it is. Finally, we wanted to actually have another tool to make the case for enhanced investment, and data is an important tool for that. And as always, we want to take the opportunity to frame cycling in a more positive light and talk about the benefits. So what did our poll tell us? Well, this is just a very quick snapshot, actually. Again, we polled 1,100 Ontarians. It was a bit oversampled, actually, in favor of motorists. So this we thought was really interesting. 89% of people we polled that, you know what, it's everybody's responsibility to share the road. So this notion that, motorists are pointing at cyclists and cyclists are pointing at motorists, actually, the vast majority of people we surveyed said, yeah, this is a shared responsibility. We all need to take ownership for our behaviors implicitly, and it's about everybody working together to take responsibility. Again, in terms of looking at tools for investment and making the case for cycling and encouraging cycling, a big piece of our work in Ontario is obviously lobbying our provincial government. We eventually want to see cycling come back into the education curriculum in Ontario, because in places where cycling works around the globe, it's a way of life. Children are educated early. They do this very well in Holland, as I think Hans touched on, and he's certainly a product of that as a young person growing up there. And so when you look at bringing cycling back into the curriculum, a figure which says 71% of people agree that that's the case, I think is a powerful tool. 70% of people we polled said that governments need to step up and invest in cycling. And the bottom line, I think that reinforces is that cycling safety is everybody's issue. Getting to the end of the presentation here, a few more quick slides. The money argument. I often hear politicians talk to me about costs, and I'm very respectful of that because it's absolutely true. We live in challenging times right now. Our money is not infinite. There are finite resources. Often it's just a question of how we invest them. But certainly this polling data, which says that it doesn't have to cost a lot of money, I think is quite accurate, and an interesting comment on the need to take creative approaches to make cycling safer. Yes, it's about infrastructure, but there are other pieces that are equally as important that we need to address. I'm remembering, I think Jennifer Dill is in the room, I'm remembering Sam Adams, the Mayor of Portland, who spoke at our summit last year, here, who talked about the cost of cycling in the past 20 years in Portland in terms of the investments that they've made. In the last 20 years, he said it's cost about $60 million. They've quadrupled their mode share in Portland. You talked ably about that. And for all the investment that's been done in terms of what you've received in return for that investment, $60 million is what it's cost, which is less than the cost of a mile of freeway, which is a pretty impactful statement, I think. So yes, it costs money. Yes, it does. But it's also an investment, and the return on investment is significant. And it's certainly something that we like to talk about whenever and however we can. And then finally, in the spectrum of giving law enforcement tools that they need to enforce better motorist behavior and more sharing of the road, we worked with the New Democratic Party caucus in Ontario to get a 3-foot or 1 meter passing law on the books. It's gone through second reading. Nova Scotia has beat us to the punch, actually, the first province in Canada to pass safe passing law to encourage the kind of safe behavior that we all know needs to happen. And we're hoping this is going to happen in Ontario. We're going to make it an election issue, and it will give our law enforcement friends the tools that we need. So in summary, creating a bike-friendly culture requires a multifaceted approach. There's no silver bullet. Sharing the road entails acknowledging personal responsibility. There's a shared responsibility component that not only shows up in our polling, but I think has been ably demonstrated today. Changing the conversation is critically important, I think, to this debate. And again, I thank the CAA for putting this event together, because we're beginning to have that dialogue. And as you know, Councillor Meggs and I actually met yesterday, and we had a lovely discussion. And I look at political champions like him who are really trying to make a change and have actually put themselves into this discussion, and I admire him for that. But changing that conversation is critical, as I mentioned earlier, to create the champions that we need, to help them do their job more effectively, and to give us the change that we need. And finally, encouraging cycling really does require working in partnership with key stakeholders. We try to do that at Share the Road as much as we can. And this is really all about change management. It involves a variety of carrot and stick approaches, education and enforcement, and legislation too. And it involves that critical piece of changing perceptions and myth busting, which I think we're again engaged in today. Cyclists versus motorists, maybe not so much. What is a cyclist anyway? And who is a cyclist? These are things that I think need to be further explored. And certainly in our work as a cycling organization, we look forward to working with all of you to making that change happen. And finally, a shameless plug. We do have an event at the end of Ottawa, and I'd love to see some of you there. And I think some of you in the room are already going to be with us. I know you will, and we look forward to that. We're having a bike summit in Ottawa to discuss all of this and more, and we look forward to working with you to make our roads safer for everybody. Thank you.